All right, wrapping up our discussion of issues with the immune system, we're going to talk about autoimmunity, which is a breakdown in differentiating self from non-self. We'll talk about a few ways this can happen and some of the diseases that are caused by this. And then we will talk briefly about what happens when someone rejects a transplant, like an organ transplant or something like that. Okay, so let's review, right? Self-tolerance. To do this, B cells and T cells have to learn not to react with self-antigens. We talked about T cell education. If they react with self, they get deleted in the thymus. B cells undergo a similar process in the bone marrow. If something causes a loss of self-tolerance, an autoimmune disorder develops. Auto means self, and this means self-immune disease. This can result in tissue damage. There are some infections that can actually trigger autoimmune reactions. There is one example of S-pyogens. It makes a protein called the M protein that looks a lot like a heart protein that we make. So the immune system reacts to this and starts making an antibody that will attack this cardiac protein and can cause rheumatic fever, which has heart issues associated with it. There are various ways this can happen. One is spontaneous through mutation. Here is a self protein, right? It has two different epitopes. One of them is this kind of wedge-shaped thing, and one is a circle. If there's a mutation and our self epitope changes to a square, our body will not have been trained to recognize that as self, right? When our T cells were educated, this was not a self epitope. So if there are mutations in our cells that change the antigens, we can then actually lead to T cells being activated against them and autoimmune disorders happening. This is kind of like the case I just talked about with the bacteria that makes something that looks kind of like our antigen. This is a similar process, but here our own genome has mutated and caused something that looks slightly similar, but causes an immune reaction, and then it attacks our body. So let's look at a case study here. We have Tamil. She's 26 years old, and she recently just started developing joint pain in her fingers, wrists, ankles, and she noticed this strange rash that goes through her cheeks, over her nose, and it kind of looks like a butterfly. So she goes to the physician, and this redness has grown worse, particularly after she was out in the sun for a very short time. So she thought it might be a sunburn, but such a short time in the sun seems strange. So they do a blood test, and she's showing normal blood cells, but her serum anti-nuclear antibody test is very positive. It's a very high level. So this is looking at basically antibodies that attack the body, anti-nucleus antibodies. So she has a lot of antibodies that are attacking her own body. The titer level is down to 1 to 256. So remember back to that ELISA. This is a very high level. Normal levels are negative at 1 to 8 dilution. So she has very high levels of these self-antibodies, basically. Well, based on the lab findings, the physician says that she has systemic lupus erythematosus, which is a common autoimmune disorder. Complexes of these autoantibodies form between her own proteins and the nuclear material, like DNA and histones and things like this that are all in the nucleus. And these antigen-antibody complexes form and then travel to various tissues and trigger inflammation. Think back to the type 3 hypersensitivity. This is similar to that. It's a type of it. So this is going out into the joints, as we talked about. It's also going to the kidneys and various organs. So if you are a fan of the show House, you will notice that they always guess that it's lupus. But as you know, Dr. House always says it's never lupus. They choose lupus so often because we don't really know what causes this in a lot of cases. We don't understand why this process develops, and it's a great thing for a TV show because you can kind of guess that it's lupus all the time because there's no great cause for it. So, but as we know, it's never lupus, right? Unless I think there's like one episode when it's probably lupus, right? There are other autoimmune diseases. Again, autoantibodies binding to different parts of the body. Graves' disease and Hashimoto's disease, both autoimmune diseases that involve the thyroid. In Graves' disease, autoantibodies bind to the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor, and they actually cause hyperthyroidism. So basically, the thyroid is overactivated. This leads to a very high metabolic rate, high energy levels in the patient. In Hashimoto's disease, it's the opposite. The autoantibodies bind and damage the thyroid, which causes hypothyroidism, low thyroidism, which causes severe fatigue from this. So these are both thyroid autoimmune diseases. Myasthenia gravis, autoantibodies bind and block muscle receptors for acetylcholine. This leads to muscle weakness. You'll see a drooping eyelid here, and it will eventually progress to more muscle weakness. This is a type 2 hypersensitivity because it's binding to a cell surface protein. Diabetes, type 1 diabetes, can be an autoimmune disorder where T cells start attacking the pancreas cells and leads to no insulin production. So this is kind of a type 4 hypersensitivity. Basically, autoimmune disorder, it destroys the pancreas cells that can make insulin. So type 1 is childhood onset, and it can be caused by this autoimmune disorder. Rheumatoid arthritis, also an autoimmune disorder. Antibodies form those immune complexes in the connective tissue of joints and cause inflammation. So here's a normal joint. Because of these complexes of antibodies, it starts forming inflammation here and actually later can call in T cells and lead to more damage. This can lead to prolonged inflammation. So one of the treatments is anti-inflammatory drugs, but long-term, you have to go to stronger things that basically kind of suppress the immune system. This is actually very common, particularly in females. It's estimated about 1 in 100 will develop rheumatoid arthritis. So you probably know someone that has this, and you can see how kind of debilitating it can be. There's many other autoimmune disorders. This is just a few. I want to finish with talking about organ transplantation and organ donation. So we've talked about the immune system recognizing self versus non-self. This also goes not just between different species, but between different individuals. Our immune system recognizes MHC, and it recognizes self versus non-self MHC. So when you get an organ transplant, we have to make sure that the MHC molecules are compatible with your own. If not, your body is going to bind to and reject this as foreign material and will actually start destroying it. The CD8 T cells will come in and start destroying it. So this is why we often look for close relatives that are genetic matches for donations. Interestingly, you might say, well, why doesn't this happen with red blood cells? Well, red blood cells have no nucleus, so they have no MHC on them. So that's why you can get blood of the same type from any individual on the planet, right? We don't have to match MHC for blood. Otherwise, blood donation would be basically impossible. That would be very devastating, right? There is an interesting problem that can happen, though. Sometimes the grafted material, the donated organ, can bring immune cells with it. And those immune cells can actually attack the new host. We call this graft-versus-host disease. It is really important that there are matches here, and even when they match, things can go wrong. In a lot of cases, we still need to suppress the immune system when a organ transplant is done to keep our body basically from attacking the new material as foreign. So we have to take basically immune system inhibitor drugs to do this. Okay, we're at the end. I think there's a lot of really cool material in there. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully something piqued your interest in there. That is it for the material that we're covering for this unit. In the final unit, we will finish up with a few various different things, a little bit about how pathogens cause disease, how we detect microbes, and some tests and things, and then talk about epidemiology. All right, that's it. See you later.